And so now the United States is going to enter the Great War. And the picture you see there is of Alvin York, the backwoodsman from Tennessee who became the most decorated soldier of the war. He entered as a conscientious objector, and then he was convinced to become a fighter. He was an expert marksman. He single-handedly captured 132 Germans in the Meuse-Argonne offensive of 1918, and for that he was awarded the Medal of Honor and a number of other citations from both the French and British governments. We're going to look today at the reluctant warrior, and then the aspect of total war as the United States becomes involved in the First World War, the Great War as we call it. We'll see total war. Then we'll see public opinion, public policy, and the war, and then labor and industry during the Great War. As it became more and more apparent that the United States was going to enter the war, you will remember that Woodrow Wilson ran on a platform of he kept us out of the war, in which he wins that in 1916. He takes office again in 1917, and then but 2 months after he is sworn in as President of the United States, he's leading the United States into war. Wilson says that if the United States goes into war, we are going to pursue peace without victory. Wilson is trying to position the United States as a power broker in the world political order. He's trying to make the United States the broker of peace. What is the provocation that is going to bring the United States into the war? Number one, the Germans were carrying out what was called unrestricted submarine warfare. That means that all ships entering the zone around Great Britain would be sunk on sight. That is unrestricted submarine warfare. They're not going to decide whether or not it's a ship that's carrying munitions or if it's just a passenger liner or something. If they see it, they will sink it. And the Germans had this strange little problem with their way of doing things. They felt like if they told you they were going to do it, it didn't matter how heinous it would be. It made it right. The second thing that brings the United States into the war was called the Zimmermann telegram. The Zimmermann telegram was a telegram from the German foreign minister to the Mexican government, essentially telling them that if the Mexicans caused enough trouble along the border with the United States and kept the United States out of the First World War, that when the Germans finally mopped up in Europe, they would then turn and somehow give back the captured territories of Texas and New Mexico and Arizona back to the Mexicans. How that would be, nobody's quite sure of. But the British intercepted the cable, released it to the United States, and this was considered the casus belli, the reason for war. And so Woodrow Wilson, now forced up against the wall and really steering the U.S. toward a war course, delivers his war message that you all have done in your primary source exercise. He wants to make the world safe for democracy. The Senate votes 82-4 for the declaration. The House 373-50. So this is not a unanimous vote to go to war. There is some dissension. The declaration is signed into law on April the 6th, 1917. Jeanette Rankin, the first female congressperson, I should say, from the state of Montana, a Republican, votes against going to war, which is significant. In all of United States history, the entire nation had never been completely at war, as in a sense of total war, in which the entire economy and all of society would be galvanized and motivated behind the war. Not even the Civil War, where there were certain aspects of society that did not take part in the Civil War. For instance, the Harvard-Yale rowing races took place while men were dying on the battlefields of the Civil War. Now we're going to see how the federal government is going to increase its power over the American people, over the American economy, over American political life. They're going to increase federal control through transportation by seizing the nation's railroads, essentially, by coordinating manufacturing, where all of manufacturing is going to be tooled in such a way to help produce material for the war. And of course, there's agricultural production. The United States is literally a breadbasket. It is going to produce enough food to feed the soldiers, and it's going to produce enough food, hopefully, to feed the starving populations of the afflicted countries. To coordinate all the war industries, Wilson appoints Bernard Baruch, whom you see there in the picture. Bernard Baruch was a great organizer, a great controller, had a lot of great ideas. And if you were any doubt about that, all you had to do was ask Bernard Baruch, and he would have told you how great he was. But he really was very well organized. There was also the National War Labor Board, which was established to make sure that workers were being treated fairly. You did not want to have strikes during a war. Wilson also appoints a young up-and-coming politician from California by the name of Herbert Hoover. He is going to lead the relief effort for Belgium. And once again, if you wanted to know just how great a worker and great an organizer Herbert Hoover was, all you needed to do was ask Herbert Hoover. The First World War is going to have, for the first time really since the Revolution, people investing in the war. Liberty loans, as they were called, where the U.S. people are going to give to the U.S. government their money, which is, of course, in the form of bonds. These bonds then would be mature and given back to the people. They would receive their money back with interest, of course. So literally, you have the American people are taking part by investing in this war. Even if they're not soldiers, they're taking part in this war. To mobilize the United States and its people behind the war, you have got to be able to galvanize public opinion, and not only that, but make sure that any opinions against the war are stifled as much as possible. And remember something, we've got freedom of speech in this country, the right of free expression. Nonetheless, the government is going to do its very, very best to make sure that those who are against the war are silenced. Many felt, who were anti-war, like Eugene Debs and the socialists, felt that the U.S. went to war to protect gold. That is, to protect the manufacturers, to protect industry leaders, and to help them profit. A war is always profitable to industry leaders. And so to counteract any such thing, you passed laws, but you also passed out your own propaganda. You had the Creel Committee, which put out pro-war propaganda and commissioned what were called 4-minute men. That is, men who could get up and in 4 minutes explain the whole raison d'etre behind the United States being in the war. There's also a great deal of anti-German sentiment going around the United States. The Germans, who had for a long time been a solid, hard-working portion of the American public life, now find themselves sort of persona non grata in the United States. And so many Germans would change their names. Families that were called Weiss, for instance, would change their name to White. Here in New Orleans, for instance, you will see a street that crosses St. Charles called General Pershing Street. That used to be called Berlin Street. These are the things that took place in the United States as German societies like Deutsches Haus and German clubs kind of went underground a little bit during this time. And the United States violated the First Amendment with the curtailing of civil liberties. The Espionage Act of 1917 cracked down on German spies in the country, or those supposedly spying for the Germans. You had the Sedition Act of 1918. The Sedition Act said you can't preach against the government. And that's a violation of the First Amendment, and nonetheless it gets passed. And Eugene Debs is in prison for this. And the judge says, I really regret having to do this. I must follow the law, but I think that this law sucks. And so Eugene Debs is put in prison. For the first time, Americans get to see their propaganda featuring the image of Uncle Sam pointing at you. I want you for the U.S. Army. What they did was they actually took the image of the British War Secretary Horatio Kitchener, and they replaced it with the image of Uncle Sam pointing at you, saying, I want you instead for the British Army, I want you for the U.S. Army. In the lower right-hand corner, you see Eugene Debs in prison attire, leaving prison after a period of time that he spent for violating the Sedition Act. What about labor and industry? How did the war affect labor and industry? First of all, union membership actually increases during the war. And you also have Rosie the Riveters. Not happening first time in World War II, but actually in World War I. As men were leaving the factories to go and serve in the armies that would go to Europe, women start to take their place in the factories. But the most important aspect of the war on labor is the Great Migration. Now this is important, and you notice that my print is rather large here because this is something that I really want you all to understand. The Great Migration is the movement of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North between 1910 and 1930. Why? Well, we'll get to the why in just a moment. First and foremost, African Americans begin to migrate into cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, New York, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Gary, Indiana, Rochester, New York, Cleveland, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, all the major cities of the manufacturing belt. And this causes racial tension as more and more African Americans come in. Why are they coming to the North? Finally, at long last, they'd had enough. The Jim Crow laws and Plessy v. Ferguson, they were not receiving the dignity that was their due, and they said, to hell with it. I'm leaving. Adding on to that, there was a massive boll weevil infestation of cotton that destroyed the cotton crop and sent many shareholders into virtual penury, and the prospect of getting a job in the North was just too good. And there was opportunity because the war industries were expanding in the North. There was jobs to be had. There was actually a labor glut. The First World War and the Immigration Act of 1924 effectively put an end to the flow of European immigrants, which was the lifeblood of the labor force in the factories. And so there was a shortage of factory workers. And finally, last but not least, the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 caused a massive movement out of the deltas of Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee and Louisiana, where poverty was just abject poverty. And the flood finally pushed those people off of their lands. And so this is why you had the Great Migration, a very important aspect of the United States between 1910 and 1930. The picture in the upper left-hand corner shows women working in munitions factories. So you see there, during the First World War, women moved into the factories. The map at your lower right shows the movement of African Americans from the South to the North. Notice where they are moving. Chicago, Detroit are the cities that really increased from the Great Migration. And you might recall the TV series Good Times with J.J. Walker, Jimmy Walker's, J.J. Evans, Dynamite. That family was a family of the Great Migration that had moved into Chicago, and at one point during the series they were going to move back to their home in Mississippi when the father died and they were forced to stay in Chicago.